Okay, so today we are going to be talking about my preferences. I don't know why I wanted to do this, but I'm doing it. We're talking about some of my preferences for books, what I like to read about very specific things. And the way I'm formatting this, I'm making the questions more you and me hanging out. So I'm going to be answering these questions for myself, but I would also really love if you wanted to, if while you were watching, if you guys pause the video and write your preferences as well. We'll treat it kind of like as a tag because I'm really curious about you guys' answers as well, and what's the more common, at least in my bubble, what's the more common preferences for each of these things. So we're going to start. The first preference we're going to be talking about is first person versus third person, or second person, I guess, is also an option here. Something that I've noticed, which isn't a hard and fast rule, but more of a more common thing, is that YA tends to lean more towards first person and adult leans more toward third person, though it happens both ways in both. But something that I've noticed about myself is that I have a strong preference for third person. So instead of saying, I opened the door and walked in, I saw this and I reacted in this way, it would be, she walked in and saw this, she thought these things. I think there's specific reasons why I prefer third person, and those reasons will come up in later questions, but I've just noticed that I find it much easier for me to sink into a story if it's third person, because then I'm along for the ride until I get attached and then I'm sunk into the story. But with first person, a lot of times I feel like the scope is too narrow for my preferences. We're experiencing the world through that person's perspective. Everything, all the situations around us are limited to that person's perspective, to their worldview, to the way they see things. And for some reason, being that close inside someone's head for a long period of time and not being able to have very much variation and having everything filtered through that person just isn't my preference. There are plenty of YA books that do this, as well as plenty of adult books that do this. And it's not always bad for me. In The Name of the Wind, I didn't feel limited at all, even though it was first person limited. I actually don't remember a single instance of me pausing and saying, I don't like this, which is something that I do pretty much every time I enter a first-person perspective book. I can still enjoy first-person perspectives. I'm currently reading Legendborn, and it's amazing. By the time you see this video, I probably have already finished it. And it's first-person limited, and that's not my favorite, but it doesn't matter because I'm still enjoying the book. So it's not that this will ruin the book for me. It just, there are certain limitations to it and certain patterns that oftentimes come with first person that I don't like. Also, in case you're interested, and I'm sure you're not, I prefer third person limited over third person omniscient, which means I prefer following one specific person over third person following a bunch of different people in a more flowy way rather than multiple perspectives. We can kind of hop in and out of how other people are feeling and thinking regularly. It's a less common writing style. Format. Okay, now we're gonna talk, what do you prefer to read? How do you prefer to read? We have hardcovers, we have paperbacks, we have mass market paperbacks, although this is kind of a large one. We have ebooks and we have audiobooks. What do you prefer? I would like for you to rank them according to your preferences. So I am a paperback gal, especially really floppy ones, which this one is medium flop. Sanderson books are amazing for this. Now, I like annotating my books. Pretty much anything that I physically read, I like writing all over and tabbing up. Actually, I don't always tab them, but I write all over them. I really enjoy writing my reactions to things, whether I hate something or I'm freaking out. I like writing it on page and getting those emotions out right now. If I have predictions, if there's something I want to remember, I'll circle it and write a little or something like that so that I can easily flip back and find it if I'm starting to connect clues, or if I'm starting starting to suspect someone, I can go back and look at previous behaviors that I've marked as a little bit odd or something like that. I find it to be a much more engaging way to read a book, and it makes it more fun for me. Plus, I really, really don't like taking notes as I read, and I read a lot of fantasy books, and I don't find it fun to write down certain aspects of the world or certain aspects of character traits or whatever for reviews that I'm gonna post later. I don't find that fun, but writing in the margins my reactions and feelings and thoughts, I can just flip through that later and collect a lot of things that I may not be thinking about now that I'm at the end of the book. But really, really floppy paperbacks that you can just hold like this and the spine won't break, that's my jam. So paperbacks are my preference. Next is mass market paperbacks. Now, I don't break spines unless it's a mass market paperback. Then those spines, they gonna die. Because I feel like you're totally within your rights when a book is this small and the spine is that stiff. You are completely within your rights to break that spine. And I do. And it's actually, I find something very, very satisfying about breaking the spine of mass market paperbacks. Or sometimes I'll get a UK edition of a book, and UK spines are very, very hard. The binding for UK books are really, really tight. I mean, maybe I've just gotten very specific editions, but maybe that's not how all UK books are. But the binding is so tight on UK books, so I break those. I could hear the audible sighs and frustrated grunts that came when I said that. Then hardbacks. Hardbacks are not my preference. I don't find them as fun to hold. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just they're heavier and it's not as fun to write in. I don't know. For whatever reason, I don't like them as well, but they're fine. Then I would choose audiobooks. I listen to a lot of audiobooks based off of convenience. I can be cleaning or driving or doing other medial chores while still enjoying a book, which is cool. It's not my preference. I feel like I miss things more easily through audiobooks, so I typically won't read fantasy through audio, but I do appreciate audio for allowing me to continue to consume stories when I can't otherwise. And then ebooks, for whatever reason, I enjoy ebooks a lot more now that I have a Kindle Paperwhite, but for whatever reason, ebooks mess with my dyslexia. I don't know why, but things get scrambled a lot easier on a screen than they do on a page. So I'm much less inclined to read ebooks, but now that I have a Kindle, it's a lot easier, so I'm getting into it a little bit more. Character versus plot. Do you prefer character-focused stories or plot-focused stories? Do you prefer stories that are really honed in on character development, making them feel real, making their choices feel honest and intentional and like what a character would actually do, making the characters very distinctly different, including the side characters? Or is the preference more on plot, on having a really strong, tightly paced, focused, driving plot? I am a selfish reader and I want both, but if a book is going to have one or the other, I will always choose character first, which is funny because I was a plot first reader for the longest time. I didn't even really care about character depth. As long as they were interesting enough that I didn't hate following them, I was fine. I just need a strong plot. And I've completely flip-flopped on that. And now I will choose something like The Blade itself that is very lacking in plot. I mean, it's still there and it's really good, but it's not even kind of the focus. And I will choose that with really honest, strong, intentional character work. I'll choose that first over a strong plot and lacking in characters every single time. In fact, there are certain books like The Starless Sea that is really well written. The world is phenomenal and it's such an interesting concept, but because the characters felt very hollow to me, I don't ever talk about the book. And even though I enjoyed reading it, I kind of have a sour taste in my mouth about that book because I felt so much lacking in the character work. Like that will actually mess up a book for me, which is funny because it's so opposite from how I used to be. Prose. A lot of readers couldn't care less about prose. I have tried to explain my preferences for prose to my husband I don't even know how many times. I've even given him examples, read sections of books from authors who I don't like their prose, and sections from authors whose prose astound me. And he's just like, I don't get it. And that's fine. I am not a flowery prose person. If prose is over the top, if prose is really indulgent in descriptions, like if you take a whole page to describe something that could have taken a couple of sentences, Strange the Dreamer was that for me. I just felt like there was so much fluff in the way that book was written, and also explaining things in very over-the-top ways. I once read something that took an entire paragraph to describe a toaster, and I just didn't need it. Fluffing up, making things extra indulgent that are quite simple is not my preference. But at the same time, an author that doesn't really seem to have any intentionality about their prose and will use the same descriptions over and over again, or the same, I guess this is something that is very unique to me, but patterns bother me a lot. If I notice a pattern, I die. So like if an author has a structure, how they structure their sentences, and they use that same structure over and over again, or they have a word that they'll use over and over again, it gets under my skin like nothing. That's actually one of the reasons why audiobooks aren't my favorite, is because a lot of narrators will pick a cadence and stick with it, and once I hear the cadence, I can't hear the book anymore. All I hear is the cadence. She walked into the room, and then she sat down. She looked at him in the eyes and got really mad. Those are really bad sentences. But my point is, like, there's a certain tone. They do this and then they go down. They go high and then low. And it's like, it doesn't matter what is happening in the book. They'll use the same cadence for everything that's happening in the book. I die. Anyway, we're talking about prose. Sorry. The point is, the two extremes aren't my favorite. I can handle more simplistic prose way more than I can handle over-the-top indulgent prose. But my favorite is a nice little mix in between. Joe Abercrombie is an excellent Sir! I don't even know who messaged me, but whoever it was, that was rude. I'm filming. Joe Abercrombie is a great example of an author who has just the sweet spot for me. He's not indulgent, but he also states things in such an impactful way. He'll find ways to say things in a unique way, something simple in a unique way that makes it hit just a little bit different. Frederick Bachman is another author that does that. He'll find ways to word things that pack a much heavier punch, and since he's a literary fiction author, I think that's very important. Again, I'll say it again, I'm currently reading Legendborn. Wait, I think I said that in a different video. Either way, I'm currently reading Legendborn, and I love the prose in Legendborn, even though there are certain things, like it's first person limited, so there are certain things that I don't like, but the prose is so beautiful, especially when talking about more emotional things, like there's a big focus on grief, and the way this author articulates the way our character feels when she's talking about her grief. It's not, she doesn't just state it, it's not simple, she finds ways to illustrate it in such a, just like, it hits me. And I love when authors are intentional with the way they word things. Okay, next one. I'm taking way too long on these. Next one is a preference for how introspective you want your characters to be. I have found that I have a limit for introspection. Characters that are really in their head and can't get out of their head, I get enough. I get to a point where I've had enough. And some of my favorite authors are very introspective authors. Some of my favorite authors will get so deep in a character's head, especially if they're dealing with a lot, that it becomes almost to where that's all we see of that character. And I do have a limit to where I think, okay, but what else? Like, this is really good, this is really deep, but what else? And I get tired of being so wrapped up in a person's head, whether it's first person or third person. And I've found, this isn't something I used to have a preference for, but I've found that really, really introspective characters, I need a break from them. I can't be in their point of view for very long. Otherwise, I start to get tired of them, even if what they're going through is really, really, really well written. I'm curious if anybody out there other than me has preferences for that, because that seems like such a specific thing that I've recently realized I can only take so much of. Which again, I think is a big part of why first person is a harder sell for me, because first person is naturally going to be more introspective, or at least it's more likely to be more introspective. Let's talk relationships. Do you have a preference for platonic or romantic relationships in your book? You may not be surprised by my answer. I happen to really love platonic relationships. Don't get me wrong, there are certain romantic relationships that are written in books that I really, really like. Some of them I get on board with and I have a blast reading. Sometimes in romance books, like in a Holidays, I've Got Your Number. Surely I like more than that. Luna, the Luna trilogy. There are certain romantic relationships that I get swept away with and I have a good time with. There's also some that I get really, really into that are not romance books, that are, fantasy. It's a lot less common for me. If I'm reading a genre book other than romance, I typically don't need romance in it. Or if it's there, I at least don't want it to be a huge focus. However, put a really great family dynamic into a story, or an amazing friendship that's so loyal that they're like family, I eat that up every time. I will get attached to the book, even if the rest of the book is terrible. Put in a really well-written platonic relationship, and I will probably enjoy it a lot. I'm curious what people think about descriptions. So there are very descriptive books out there. There are books that focus a ton on really intense world building, that focus a ton on really breaking, if it's a fantasy, really breaking down the magic system and making sure that the reader understands every single level of it. Books that are really, really focused on atmosphere and environment. And books that describe clothing to the nth degree. I'm curious what people feel, what's their preference on what an author would focus on description-wise, or if there are readers out there that just would prefer very description soft books, not so much description. I found really, really recently that a big factor of me enjoying a book, of me getting fully immersed in a book, is having the scenery and the tone and the feeling described really well. Now, don't get me wrong, some books focus on this a ton and I still don't like them, like The Bear and the Nightingale. But I've noticed that books that I get the most into are books that have heavy descriptions on environment. In fact, there are some books that don't put a lot of focus in describing what things look like, not clothes, but specifically describing what the world looks like, and focusing a lot on the feelings of the world, how the world feels. Books that don't put much focus on that, I typically can't picture them. I don't fill in the gaps very well, and because of that, I have a harder time retaining that world. But books that put a big focus on immersion, or put a big focus on writing, being very immersive in writing, those books, I usually feel like I've entered into them and I enjoy them a lot more. And this isn't just about fantasy. Not Timeline specifically. Michael Crichton, this author, is very, very immersive in the way he writes, and he's writing here on Earth, and he's writing sci-fi, but he has such immersive writing that I feel so involved in his stories so early on. Next question is standalone versus series, and as a fantasy reader, you may be surprised, I think I like standalones more. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy series a lot, but I think just because there are so many different worlds I want to enter and so many different stories I want to experience, a lot of times I'll put off reading sequels longer than I really mean to, but I just have so many things that I'm excited about that I want something that's contained so that I can move on. Again, my husband does not understand this. He's not interested in starting new things. He just wants to stay in one thing for as long as possible. So really long series, he loves. Really long books, he's thrilled with. Once he runs out of a series, he'll usually just stop reading unless I hassle him enough to start something new. And then he loves that something new and wants to stay there for as long as possible. But I think I'm the opposite. I enjoy dipping my toes into so many different places and so many different stories that I really appreciate very short series or standalone books. Okay, only 2 more questions. I'll try to be faster because, oh my goodness, I've been wordy this video. Do you guys prefer single POV or multiple POV? Do you like when we follow one character the whole time, or do you like when different chapters or different sections of a chapter will jump to a different character? I don't think I have a preference on this. I think my favorite books are comprised of both, and I don't think I've ever entered a book and thought, oh man, we have to follow all these different people. But I think I'm pretty comfortable with both. It's something that rarely crosses my mind. I'm happy either way. And my final question, if you can only have one, what is most important to you? A strong start to a book, a strong middle, or a strong finish? I think my preference is a strong finish. And if I were to rank them, it would be strong finish, strong start, strong middle. I've noticed that I can really, really enjoy a book, and if the ending is really rushed and I feel like I needed 50 to 100 pages more in order for it to be satisfying, that's a bigger letdown to me than most things. If a book had amazing buildup and then the payoff is flattened because it's so fast or because it doesn't tie up all the loose ends that it needs to, or is really easily resolved, whatever it would be to make that ending disappointing, it'll sour the entire book for me. Whereas a book that has a strong beginning and strong end, or one or the other, but has a flat middle, I can forgive really easily. And a book that has a lacking beginning but then gets good after that start, I can forgive that as well. Although sometimes books will lose me if they have a particularly not gripping beginning. So as I thought about this, I realized that a strong ending, I think, is the most important component as far as what needs to be strong. That's the most important thing for me, because a weak ending will actually make me not like the book very much, even if the book was really strong otherwise. Okay, I've rambled enough about what I like and don't like in books. I'm really excited to see what you guys think, how you guys answer each of these questions. So be sure to chat with me more about it in the comments. I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.